There is a language that has not been spoken in England for about 900 years. Nobody teaches it. Nobody writes in it. There is no village left where you could walk in and hear it. It died out in this country somewhere in the 12th century, and it should have vanished completely, except it did not. Because when the Norse settled Yorkshire, they did not just take the land, they renamed it. And then, a few hundred years later, when ordinary English people started needing permanent surnames, an enormous number of Yorkshire families reached for the name of the place they lived, or the job they did, or the nickname their neighbours used, and the words they reached for were Norse. So there are hundreds of thousands of people walking around today, in Leeds and Hull and Sheffield and Scarborough and every town in between, carrying a piece of a dead Viking language on their bank card, and most of them have absolutely no idea. These are 20 Yorkshire surnames that came out of Old Norse. Number 1 is not a place or a job. It is the name of a god. This is Dustin Stories. Subscribe, because the oldest thing in your family might be your own name. First, why Yorkshire specifically? In the year 866, a Norse army took York. Not a raid, an occupation. They held the city, renamed it Jorvik, and ran a Scandinavian kingdom out of it for most of the next century. The land north and east of a line agreed between Alfred of Wessex and the Danish king Guthrum became the Danelaw, and Yorkshire sat in the middle of it. You can still see it on a map. Yorkshire is covered in Norse place names. Anything ending in "boy" is a Norse farmstead. Whitby, Selby, Wetherby, Danby. Anything ending in Thorpe is a Norse outlying settlement. Anything with a thwaite in it is a Norse clearing. There are more of these in Yorkshire than in any other part of England, and there are hundreds of them. And it went further than the map. It got into the way people speak. A Yorkshire farmer talking about a beck, a gill, a garth, a lathe, or a lug is using Norse vocabulary without any sense that it is foreign, because for him it is not foreign. It is simply the word. The Old English equivalents lost the argument up here 900 years ago and never came back. That is the crucial thing to understand about the Danelaw. This was not a garrison sitting on top of a hostile population. It was settlement, farms, families, marriages, land deals, lawsuits. The Norse who came to Yorkshire were not passing through, and they were not just taxing the place. They were living in it, in numbers large enough to reshape what the entire region called its own landscape. The people who lived in those places eventually needed surnames, and that is how a Viking vocabulary ended up in a modern phone book. Number 20, booth. From the Old Norse booth, a temporary shelter, the rough hut a herdsman slept in while the animals were up on the summer pasture. If your name is Booth, somewhere back down the line, your family were the ones living out on the high ground with the stock, in a shelter thrown up for a season. It is one of the most common surnames in the Old West Riding, and it is not an English word at all. Number 19, garth. From the Old Norse garter, an enclosure or a yard. It is the same root that gives us garden, and the same root behind Asgard, the stronghold of the Norse gods. Asgard simply means the enclosure of the Aesir, so a Yorkshireman called Garth and the home of Odin are carrying the same word. Number 18, slack. From the Old Norse slacky, a shallow dip or hollow in the ground. It has nothing to do with being lazy. It is a landscape word, and it survives across the Pennines in field names to this day. If your name is Slack, your family were named after a dent in a hill. Number 17, car. From the Old Norse kjar, wet scrubby ground, boggy land grown over with brushwood. Car is everywhere in Yorkshire, both as a surname and stitched into place names. It is one of the most reliably Norse words in the county, and it tells you exactly what kind of land your ancestors were working, not the good stuff. Number 16, ray, also spelled ray or ray. From the Old Norse VRA, a nook or a corner, a tucked away spot out of the wind. It is a quietly lovely thing to be named after. Not a hall, not an estate. A sheltered corner. Number 15, rig. From the Old Norse rigger, a ridge, and the same word that gives us the ridge of your own back. Rig, rigs, and Rigby all come out of it. If it is your name, your family lived on the high spine of the land, where the wind gets you. Number 14, scales. From the Old Norse scali, a hut or a shieling, the shed you used when you were away from the main farm. Nothing to do with weighing things and nothing to do with fish. It is a building, and it is a Norse building. Number 13, story. From the Old Norse by name story, which simply means the big one. This one is different from the others because it is not a place. It is a nickname that stuck so hard it became a family. Some ancestor of yours was large enough that the whole community called him the big fella in Norse, and 1,000 years later, you are still signing it. Number 12, Briggs, from the Old Norse brigja, a bridge or a landing stage. The Norse word muscled the English one aside across the north, which is why Northerners historically said brig where Southerners said bridge, and why the surname is Briggs and not Bridges. It is a small everyday word that shows you exactly where the language border ran. Number 11, Hesketh, from the Old Norse haster, a horse, and skeeth, a racetrack. It literally means horse race course. The Norse held horse races and horse fights as public events, and the places they held them kept the name. If you are a Hesketh, your family are named after a Viking sports ground. Number 10, Lund, from the Old Norse lunder, a grove of trees, but not any grove. In the Scandinavian homelands, lunder repeatedly turns up attached to sacred sites, groves set aside for the old gods. It is one of the few Norse landscape words in England that carries a whiff of religion in it, and there are lunds scattered across the East Riding. Number 9, home, and its much commoner cousin, homes, from the Old Norse holmer, an island or a piece of raised dry ground in a marsh, or a flat meadow in a river bend. It is one of the most widespread Norse elements in the north of England, and it carries a strange piece of Viking law with it. A holmgang, literally an island going, was the Norse formal duel. 2 men rowed out to a small island, and only one came back, because on an island nobody could interfere and nobody could run. Number 8, Beck, from the Old Norse becker, a stream. This is the single clearest linguistic fossil in the north. In the south of England, small watercourses are brooks, from Old English. In Yorkshire, they are becks, from Old Norse, and they still are today in ordinary speech. The word never left, it just stopped being foreign. And you can more or less draw the old frontier by asking people what they call a stream. There is a line across England where brook stops and beck starts, and it sits remarkably close to where the Danelaw boundary ran. 1,000 years after the kingdom collapsed, the border is still there. It has just moved into people's mouths. Number 7, Gill, from the Old Norse gill, a narrow, steep-sided ravine with water running through it. Anyone who has walked the Dales has climbed a dozen of them. It is one of the commonest surnames in Yorkshire and one of the commonest features in the landscape, and both of them are Norse. Number 6 is not one name but a whole family of them. Anything with Thwaite in it. Thwaite is the Old Norse Tveit, a clearing, a piece of ground cut out of the woodland and made into something usable. Braithwaite is the broad clearing. Micklethwaite is the great clearing. Satterthwaite is the clearing by the Sheeling. Every single one of those names is a record of a Norse family walking into a Yorkshire wood with axes and deciding to stay. Number 5, Thorpe, and every name built on it. Thorpe is the Old Norse Torp, a secondary settlement, the smaller place that grew up in the shadow of a bigger one. Yorkshire is absolutely covered in them, and the surname followed the places. Here is the part people miss. The distribution of Thorpe names on a map of England is not random. It traces the Danelaw almost exactly. You can draw the border of Viking-ruled England using nothing but this one word. Number 4, Kirkby, Kirby, and Plain Kirk, from the Old Norse Kirkja, a church, and by a settlement. Kirkby means church farm. And notice what that tells you. These were not the pagan raiders of the first generation. These were settled Norse families who had taken up Christianity and were naming their villages after the church in them. The surname records not the invasion, but what happened afterwards, when the invaders stopped being invaders and started being neighbours. Number 3, Swain and Swainson, from the Old Norse Svein, a young man, a lad, a servant or retainer. It was also an extremely common Norse personal name, and it has left a heavy mark on Yorkshire. Swaledale, Swainby, Swainsthorpe. If your name is Swainson, it means son of Svein, and you are using a Norse patronymic in an English county a millennium after the language died. Number 2, Thurston, from the Old Norse Thorstein, Thor's stone. That is not a metaphor and it is not a coincidence. It is a theophoric name, a name built around a god, and it was one of the most popular in the Norse world. Every Thurston in Yorkshire is carrying the thunder god's name in front of them in a slightly worn down English spelling, and almost none of them know it. There are others in the same family. Turkettle and Turkel come from Torketil, Thor's cauldron. Thoragud and Thurgud come from Thorgotter. There is a whole cluster of Yorkshire names with Thor in the first syllable, one honest thing before the last name, because we say every video that we deal in what is real. A surname is not a DNA test. It tells you what your family were called and where and in which language. It does not prove a straight line of descent from a man who stepped off a longship, because names travel. Households took the name of the estate. Servants took the name of the master. Names were adopted, imposed, changed, and misheard for centuries. What a Norse surname genuinely proves is that your family line was rooted in a place where Norse was the language people reached for when they needed to name things. In Yorkshire, that covers an enormous amount of ground. Take it as a map, not a birth certificate. Number 1, Grimes, Grimshaw, Grimston, Grimwood, Grimsby. If your family came from just over the Humber, all of them come from the Old Norse personal name Grimmer. And Grimmer is not an ordinary word. It means the masked one or the hooded one. It is what you call somebody whose face you cannot see. It is also one of the names Odin goes by. In the Norse poems, Odin travels the world in disguise, in a hood and a wide hat, hiding his missing eye, and when he does, he uses cover names. Grimmer is one of them. Grimnir, the masked one, is the title of an entire poem in which the god turns up in a hall unrecognized and is tortured between 2 fires for 8 nights before he finally announces who he is. Norse parents gave their sons that name in enormous numbers. It traveled to Yorkshire with the settlers, it attached itself to their farms and their woods, and it turned into some of the most ordinary surnames in the north of England. So if your name is Grimes or Grimshaw, this is the position. Your family is not named after a hill, or a stream, or a job, or a clearing in a wood. Your family is named after the disguise the god of the dead wore when he did not want to be recognized. 20 names. A herdsman's hut, an enclosure, a hollow, a bog, a nook, a ridge, a shieling, and a big man. A bridge, a racecourse, a sacred grove, an island, a stream, a ravine, a clearing, an outlying farm, a church, a young retainer, the thunder god, and the masked one. None of it English. All of it still here. The Norse ruled in Yorkshire for less than a century and were absorbed into the population within a couple of generations after that. They lost the kingdom, they lost the language, and in the end, they lost the argument about who the North belonged to. But they named the place first, and the names outlasted everybody. If you found your own name in this list, subscribe to Dustin Stories. We dig up the history hiding inside ordinary things and the places the map quietly forgot. Like the video. Drop a comment with your surname and where your family is from, and we will tell you what we can find. And thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.